All right. Craig Wagner here with Peter Christensen. We're going to go ahead and go through page one of the new REPC. This is where you see kind of the most stark difference between
It's going to scare a few people.
the previous REPC and what we have now. Really, it's the formatting and certainly some additions, but it's meant to be user friendly. So that's probably my biggest takeaway from this page one is the user-friendly aspect for both the buyer and the seller in helping both parties. One, the buyer to make their offer as strong or as competitive as possible, and then certainly a seller to evaluate this buyer's offer and certainly how to compare it to other buyers. Are there any things that you see, Peter, as far as maybe initial takeaways from page one?
I love it. It was a huge change, and I think I had to warm up to it at the beginning. But I see the point in doing this. It really reads like a lot of leases where the pertinent information that's subject to change, that's really up to the buyer mostly, but buyer and seller to fill in the most changeable information. The blanks are mostly in this first page, so it's very consumer friendly. So a seller can really sit down with two of these offers and see how they differ without digging through the whole contract to see which blanks were filled in with what. And I love it. And so it's got that kind of, the concepts introduced, the decision is made on this first page, and then the additional language is in subsequent pages. So
Exactly.
that really freed mostly Craig in formatting this. He would go back and do the dirty work of actually putting it in the Word document, but really freed him up to be able to put as much information on this first page as possible by having the kind of the boilerplate explanation later on. And it does make, sometimes you got to bounce back and forth a little bit, but I love it. I think it reads really nice.
Yeah, I agree. So let's go through a couple of these sections. Obviously, you've got a little bit of restructuring. So, for example, the section 0, so to speak, where it talks about the offer date and the respective parties, this language isn't necessarily new, but it is obviously at the beginning now. So what are we talking about? Well, you've got right there, this is the property, and you identify it early on. This is going to be a difference than where we used to have earnest money. That's going to be in a new section on page 2. So you've got the identifying the property, pretty self-explanatory there. Section 1, this is where you have the actual offer to purchase, so the financial components of the purchase agreement. Anything in Section 1 that stands out that any sort of listener or watching of this video should pay attention to?
Yeah, I think the big change is, well, you have one option gone, and that's the additional earnest money. And hopefully that makes sense by the end of why that changed, but it's emphasized in a different way in this format. And but it was the other line that's added. So this is trying to give a complete picture of the financing. How is this being purchased? What money is being used? Where is it coming from? Because as you know, when you represent a seller, it makes a difference in the strength of each offer. It makes a difference in the timing of the offers, how it's being purchased. If it's just cash that's in a bank account right now versus financing, what type of financing? What conditions does the financing come with? And I think we left buyers with a little bit of a gray area in, it's not a cash offer, but I'm not getting a traditional loan. And maybe I'm financing it through a HELOC or a bridge loan because I'm selling something or moving some retirement or whatever. So this other line allows them a space to explain, here is a different form of financing that's not covered in the new loan section. I don't feel like it fits there, but it's not just cash in my bank account. And so it gives, and they're examples. It has a HELOC, hard money, bridge loan, but it really is meant to be any alternative financing outside of what we'd consider just a conventional loan.
Excellent. I agree. And so I don't necessarily see anything else, and everything else looks pretty self-explanatory. Section 2, this is an entirely new section, but the concepts shouldn't be foreign. They are something that are part of traditional offers in most traditional offers. So you have Section 2.1. This deals with the real estate brokerage compensation amount. This is what the buyer would ask the seller. If the buyer has representation, what is the seller potentially going to be willing to compensate? One minor change, but it is a difference, and it's based on calls. You'll notice that there's a percentage of the gross purchase price and a dollar amount. So you could, in theory, fill in both. But again, this isn't meant to exceed what's in your buyer-broker agreement. So a buyer's agent needs to be very transparent with their client about what this section signifies and why the seller may be willing to pay that. Section 2.2, closing costs. This is relevant, obviously, to a seller because this could be what the buyer may need in order to purchase the seller's property. And then it highlights, you'll notice a cross-reference section in 8.3c. It highlights exactly maybe the terms of what closing costs could be used for. And then 2.3, this is one of your favorite sections, Peter, home warranty plan. Why would that be under the seller contribution section?
It's an option for the buyer to ask for the seller to pay for that. And that's what this section is really trying to get at is what is the buyer asking the seller to pitch in and to pay for? And so, yeah, that one, there are a lot of opinions on that one, and it's there, page 1. So it's good stuff.
Yep, excellent. And then section 3, a new concept. It's a way for the buyer to indicate what conditions of purchase. And so you're just going to check a box or boxes that apply. So again, these conditions aren't necessarily new, but they are going to be able to the seller's going to be able to ascertain on page 1 what conditions apply. So pretty self-explanatory. 3A, due diligence condition. You check that box, and then you got the cross-reference section. The appraisal condition, you check that box, the cross-reference section applies. Now, there is a financing condition, but I do see some additional language underneath it.
Lots of extra language.
Yeah,
there.
why the additional check boxes, and kind of what is that meant to do with regards to the offer the buyer is submitting to the seller?
Yeah, this is one of, we said there, most of the concepts are the same. This is really expanding on a concept that's in the old REPC. And it was buried in 8.3, and it was put in 8 or 9 years ago whenever we did the last iteration, really to protect a seller who has a buyer insisting on a late finance deadline, and I'm going to take my home off the market so you can make sure your finances are in order, but you're going to get a pretty easy out of the contract with that finance condition, and then I'm going to be stuck with nothing. And so there was that concept where you could have some earnest money go to the seller if the buyer canceled based off of finance. And what we found was nobody was using it. As much as people complained about that scenario, they still weren't using it. And even people that fought to put that in the last contract weren't using it. And so we kind of talked about why and what was the issue. And this was probably maybe the most heavily debated section. I don't know why I'm saying that. It doesn't make any difference whether it was heavily debated or not. But a lot of opinions about this. And I think we came to a nice settled where all the differing opinions about this kind of settled on this, and I think everyone kind of liked it in the end. I think there was a pretty good adoption rate of this, a pretty good acceptance of this. Okay, so here's how it works. So the idea is you have your earnest money, you put that in there, and then it says here, you have a box you can check that says 50% of the earnest money, or you can check a different box and there's a blank to fill in, or this percentage of the earnest money deposit described below shall be released to the seller. if buyer cancels the REPC in accordance with 12.3A. What is 12.3A? Well, we'll save you from having to go look through that. It's the finance condition. So basically, if the buyer cancels based on the finance condition, then whatever they've indicated in this section, that percentage of the earnest money will go to the seller. And, okay, what if, we always have to think this way, what if nobody checks the box? The buyer just forgets to check the box. Well, if no box is checked, then the percentage shall be 50%. So it's really that first box is the default. So huge change here. And this is where people, the thinking was that the buyer fills out the REPC. And so does the buyer have to agree to give half their earnest money to the seller if they cancel based off of finance? No. They can check that box and put 0. That with the blank, right? So they still have, but that was the default before. Now the default is 50%. So half your earnest money will go to the seller. And so it starts a conversation. As a seller, as a buyer's filling it out, and they look, what does this mean? Oh, I by default will give up 50%. Well, I don't want to. They have to purposefully move that to 0. And then the seller can see, how serious are they about this offer? Well, they've put 0. Does that mean they are thinking they might cancel 3 weeks into the transaction, whenever that finance deadline is? Or they're willing to put some skin in the game and they put 50%. So, or more, or 30%, 20%, whatever. They can put whatever they want in there. But it forces the conversation. It puts it right in front of the seller's eyes as they're looking at the offer and how strong it is. And it starts that conversation with the listing agent too. Let's say they check that and put 0. What does that mean, listing agent? Well, if they cancel based off of finance, which here's the deadline, which you'll see in the next section, now we can see I will lose all the earnest money, basically don't get anything for having my home off the market for 25 days, 21 days, whatever they put in that deadline. So, but my worry is it's going to be an expensive lesson when a buyer's agent forgets to mark something,
Sure,
or doesn't explain to their buyer what does that mean, and they think they have till the finance deadline to get all their money back. Make sure you understand the default is 50. If you want it to be something else, you got to check that second box and put in a different number. And the buyer's got to understand this is a significant departure from the default of the old REPC.
yeah, and I would also just make it clear the percentage is what's being released to the seller.
Right.
So don't, if you want to have all the earnest money given to your buyer, don't put in 100%. Like, you got to read this. It's what's being released to the seller. And these rights to cancel are going to be independent of one another. And it's nice because there are these new deadlines with regards to when you have rights to cancel and then what happens to the earnest money. And so this is a good one to pay attention to. Now, under 3D, it does talk about the subject to sale of buyer's property condition. Again, this is meant to be transparent. There still is going to be the UAR form, the subject to sale of buyer's property addendum. If that addendum is not attached, then really what this becomes is a disclosure as opposed to a condition of purchase. And it's kind of what you highlighted, Peter, is, well, what happens if the addendum doesn't get attached or a checkbox doesn't get checked? The committee tried to go through scenarios of, well, then this will happen. And because that is a call I've gotten on the hotline where we already have the subject to sale language as part of the REPC where you check a box, but it references an addendum, and sometimes that addendum doesn't get attached. And so we do try to shore that up or tie that up a little bit.
Yeah, and the warning is, again, this is it functions exactly how it did before, but it is in that conditions of purchase. So I want you to realize that just checking that box, having a buyer just check that box and say it is conditioned on the sale of buyer's property, it does not give the buyer additional rights. You have to have the addendum in there.
Right.
And that, again, is My worry is a buyer's agent will check that box, tell the buyer, yep, we're going to check that, and fail to put the addendum in there, and then the buyer has no additional rights. Really, they've just notified the seller. They don't have any right to cancel based off of that, and they may find themselves in trouble. Maybe it couples with that section above, and they end up losing part of their earnest money because they cancel later.
Sure.
And so just be aware. Checking the box does not give them the condition. Putting the addendum in does.
And it's certainly possible a buyer and a buyer's agent does that intentionally, where they want to be transparent. They check that box. They highlight the property that they need to sell, but they're saying, look, I want it to be more of a disclosure because we're already under contract and, we feel comfortable moving forward.
Yeah.
But it's meant to help the seller evaluate the strength of the offer. And then section 4, this is moving the deadline section to page 1.
Yeah, why were they in the back?
I have no idea.
This is great.
Predates my time, but I do
I was
love
on
it
those
here.
committees.
I do love it here. And yeah, the wheels sometimes turn a little bit slowly, but you will notice that there's a parceling out of the appraisal deadline and the financing deadline. They're no longer just one deadline. Now, you certainly could have the same date. I mean, there's nothing that precludes that.
Sure.
But they're separate.
All the same date.
And what's interesting, this was in part, I got feedback from classes like, we would love to separate this. And this is, again, part of the discussion. Like, should we just have one deadline, merge all of the deadlines into, due diligence, financing, appraisal? And ultimately, the committee felt strongly about parceling them out.
Yeah.
But as a seller evaluating this should be, you see the closeness of the deadlines and how close they are to settlement. You can pretty easily evaluate the strength of an offer.
Yeah.
And then you also have the possession.
It's a great spot for it.
I think it makes sense. It was in the closing section.
Just buried in the middle of the contract.
And you kind of had to search for it. So now it's pretty clear, when do they want to take possession? Oh, upon recording. Oh, great. That's the last step of closing. And so it makes sense. It's meant to create transparency.
Yeah. And I think it's awesome. I think you did an awesome job getting that much information on page 1. I know if we could have gone down to 5-point font, we could have got everything we wanted on here, but we had to kick a couple things to the next page. So just a little teaser for the next video.
All right. So that's the end of page 1.